On a freezing Christmas night, a poor single mother walks into a diner with her hungry twin children and only $28 left in her hand. As she looks at the menu, shame and panic quietly overwhelm her and tears of helplessness begin to fall, unaware that a billionaire sitting in the corner has witnessed everything. A few minutes later, he stands up and walks to the counter, handing his card to the cashier. What happens next will shatter your heart. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from, subscribe and hype, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The streets of downtown Atlanta sparkled with holiday decorations. Cheerful music floated through the crisp December air. Families moved along the sidewalks with smiles on their faces, carrying gifts and laughing together under the glow of thousands of twinkling lights. Everywhere there was warmth, joy, and celebration. But among all that light and happiness, a solitary figure moved through the cold night, unnoticed. A black mother walked slowly, gripping the hands of her two young daughters. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, her shoulders weighed down by the burden of raising two children alone. Sarah Mitchell was 32 years old, though the lines around her eyes made her look older. Her girls, 7-year-old twins Maya and Zoe, wore thin jackets that did little to protect them from the freezing wind. Their small hands trembled in her grip, yet their eyes still carried innocent hope. Inside her wallet, Sarah had exactly $28. As she walked, her hand kept slipping into her coat pocket, touching the worn leather as if to reassure herself that it was still there. Fear sat heavy in her chest. She knew $28 would barely cover a decent meal for her girls, especially on a night like this when restaurants charged holiday prices. Her own stomach had been empty since yesterday afternoon, but that pain had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. Sarah had been raising Maya and Zoe alone since her husband died 3 years ago. Marcus had been killed in a car accident on his way home from his second job, leaving her with 2 4-year-old daughters, a mountain of medical debt, and no life insurance. She had fought to keep them afloat ever since, working as a nursing assistant at an understaffed hospital, picking up every extra shift she could find. But this month had been brutal. Her car had broken down, costing $600 she didn't have. She'd missed 3 days of work with the flu. The rent was due, and she was 2 weeks behind. After walking for some time, she stopped in front of a restaurant called Miller's Family Diner. Warm light spilled out through its large windows. Inside, she could see families sitting close together, eating, laughing, and enjoying hot meals. The sound of plates clinking and quiet chatter drifted outside into the cold. Sarah hesitated. She had passed this place 100 times before, always keeping her distance, knowing it was beyond her means. But tonight was different. Tonight was Christmas Eve, and her girls deserved something special, even if it meant spending money she needed for bus fare home. She looked down at Maya and Zoe. Their eyes were fixed on the diner, wide with hunger and longing. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed the door open and led them inside. The warm air wrapped around them instantly, melting the cold from their frozen skin. But with the warmth came eyes, curious, judging eyes that briefly studied their worn clothes and tired faces. A well-dressed couple at a nearby table whispered to each other. A businessman looked up from his phone, his gaze lingering a moment too long. Sarah lowered her gaze and guided her daughters toward an empty booth near the back wall. They slid into the worn vinyl seats quietly, trying to make themselves small. A waitress in her 50s approached, placed 3 menus on the table, and left without a word. Her expression was neutral, but something in her eyes made Sarah feel even smaller. She picked up the menu. Her eyes moved slowly over the list of food items, but her heart began to pound. Everything was expensive. Burgers, fried chicken, meatloaf, prices that made her throat tighten. Once again, she pulled out her wallet and counted the bills. $28. That was all. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the wallet. Her mind raced with worry. If I buy real meals for the girls, will there be enough left for bus fare home? What if the bill is more than I expect? What if I have to ask them to take something back? She looked up at her daughters. They were studying the pictures on the menu with excitement, pointing at different meals, dreaming without knowing her fear. Maya was running her finger over a picture of a chocolate milkshake. Zoe's eyes were locked on an image of a cheeseburger with golden fries. They had no idea what was running through their mother's heart. In the far corner of the diner, an elderly man sat alone at a table near the window. At 73 years old, William Harrison carried himself with quiet dignity despite his age. His silver hair was neatly combed back. He wore a simple but expensive wool coat, a vintage watch that spoke of old money rather than flash, and carried a leather briefcase that had traveled the world with him. He had been sitting there for the past hour, nursing a cup of coffee and picking at a slice of pie he had no appetite for. His grandson had promised to meet him for dinner. The boy had cancelled at the last minute, sending a brief text about a party he couldn't miss. It was the 4th time this month. William had learned long ago that money could buy many things, but it could not buy time with people who were too busy to give it. His eyes drifted across the diner and landed on the mother and her 2 girls in the back booth. He noticed immediately how the woman stared at the menu for too long, how she opened and closed her wallet. He noticed the children's hungry looks and their thin jackets. He noticed how several other diners glanced at them with thinly veiled judgment. William said nothing, but his gaze stayed fixed on them. Something in the mother's posture reminded him of someone he had known long ago. Someone who had carried the same weight of impossible choices. Back at the booth, Sarah quietly raised her hand and called the waitress. "We'll have 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and 2 small waters," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. The waitress raised an eyebrow. "That's all? No drinks besides water?" "That's all," Sarah confirmed, shame burning in her chest. The girls looked at her in surprise. "Mama, aren't you eating?" Maya asked gently. Sarah forced a smile that trembled at the edges. "I ate before we left, sweetie. This is all for you too." But in her heart, she knew there had been nothing to eat at home. There was barely anything in the apartment at all, just empty cupboards and unpaid bills stacked on the counter. The waitress wrote down the order and walked away, her expression unreadable. Silence settled over the table. The girls placed their hands in their laps, no longer smiling. Their excitement had dimmed, replaced by confusion and a creeping awareness that something was wrong. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed both of their hands tightly, trying to transfer her strength to them while her own was slipping away. Across the diner, William Harrison continued to watch. He had spent the last 50 years building a manufacturing empire, attending charity galas, cutting ribbons at hospital wings that bore his family name. He had written checks for millions, always from a distance, always through foundations and boards. But he had never seen struggle this close, this raw, this quiet. And in that moment, something inside him stirred. Because what was about to happen next would change everything. Soft holiday music played inside the diner, but inside Sarah Mitchell's heart, a storm of anxiety raged. She kept glancing at the door, then at her children, then at the check presenter sitting at the edge of the table. Fear tightened around her chest. What if the bill was more than $28? What if she had miscalculated? What if everyone in this restaurant witnessed her shame? A few minutes later, the waitress returned carrying 2 plates. 2 grilled cheese sandwiches cut diagonally, slightly burned at the edges, accompanied by a handful of potato chips. Steam rose into the air, carrying the smell of melted cheese and toasted bread. The moment the food touched the table, the girls' faces lit up. They leaned forward eagerly and began to eat, their small hands moving fast, afraid the food might disappear. Sarah only watched. Zoe broke off a corner of her sandwich and held it out to her mother. "Mama, you should have some too." Sarah shook her head quickly and forced a smile. "I'm full, baby, you both eat." But her empty stomach twisted painfully with every word. She could feel saliva pooling in her mouth as she watched them eat, her body betraying how desperately hungry she was. Across the diner, William Harrison saw everything. At first there was curiosity in his eyes, then surprise, and finally a deep, unsettling recognition. The holiday party he had left early would be in full swing now, business associates discussing mergers and market trends over expensive whiskey. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. His attention was locked on that booth in the corner. He saw how the mother did not take a single bite. He saw how she only watched her children, smiling despite the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. He saw her quietly wipe the corner of her eye when she thought no one was looking. Something old and painful stirred inside William's chest. He saw his late wife in that mother's face. Catherine. Beautiful, proud Catherine, who had grown up in poverty, who had known what it meant to go hungry, who had worked her way through nursing school while raising their son alone for months at a time while William traveled for business. Catherine, who had died 15 years ago, leaving him wealthy beyond measure but utterly alone. Before she died, Catherine had made him promise something. William, don't let the money make you forget what matters. Don't let it build walls between you and the people who need you. He had failed that promise. He had buried himself in business, keeping his grandson at arm's length with expensive gifts instead of time, writing checks to charities instead of actually helping people with his own hands. He slowly straightened in his chair, his weathered hands tightening around his coffee cup. He was about to stand when his phone buzzed. Another message from his grandson Tyler. Sorry again, Grandpa, the guys really wanted me at this party. Rain check, empty words. He had heard them before. William silenced his phone and placed it face down on the table. Back at the booth, Sarah's heart started to race. The girls were nearly done eating. Now the bill would come. She glanced nervously toward the register where the waitress was preparing the check. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her wallet again. Please God, she whispered silently. Just let this be enough. The girls placed their last bites of sandwich in their mouths. Their plates were empty except for a few crumbs. Sarah instantly pulled out her wallet, counting the bills one more time under the table. $28. It had to be enough. It had to be. The waitress was walking in their direction with a small slip of paper in her hand. Sarah's breathing grew shallow. And then something unexpected happened. The elderly man in the corner booth suddenly stood up. The movement was so deliberate, so purposeful, that several nearby diners turned to look. William Harrison had made a decision. He walked directly to the counter where the waitress was preparing Sarah's bill. His steps were measured, his posture straight despite his age. Excuse me, William said quietly but firmly. That family in the back booth. What's their total? The waitress glanced at the receipt. $14.75, sir. William pulled a crisp $100 bill from his wallet and placed it on the counter. Apply this to their meal. Whatever is left, I want you to bring those children the best dessert you have. Hot chocolate, ice cream, whatever makes them smile. And bring their mother a full dinner, something substantial. The waitress's eyes widened. Sir, are you sure? Completely sure, William replied. And please don't tell them it came from me. Not yet. The waitress nodded slowly, still processing what had just happened. William returned to his table and sat down, his heart beating faster than it had in years. He picked up his coffee cup with trembling hands, pretending to read the menu while watching the booth from the corner of his eye. A few minutes later, the waitress approached Sarah's table with a strange expression on her face. Ma'am, she said, her tone completely different now, softer, almost apologetic. There's been a situation with your bill. Sarah's stomach dropped, her worst fear was coming true. The bill was more than she had. She would have to return the food, embarrass her children, prove to everyone in this restaurant that she was exactly what they assumed, a failure. How much is it? She asked. Her voice barely audible. The waitress set down the check presenter. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a receipt that read, balance paid in full. Merry Christmas. Sarah stared at the words, unable to process them. I don't understand, she whispered. Someone has paid for your meal, ma'am, the waitress explained. And they've ordered dessert and a full dinner for you as well. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Who did this? The waitress glanced toward William's table, but the older man gave a subtle shake of his head. They wish to remain anonymous, the waitress said gently. Maya and Zoe looked at each other in confusion, then at their mother, whose face had crumpled with emotion. Mama, why are you crying? Zoe asked, her small voice worried. Sarah pulled both girls into her arms and held them tightly. Because sometimes, she said through tears, God sends angels when we need them most. William Harrison watched from across the diner, his own eyes wet. He had written million-dollar checks without feeling a fraction of what he felt in this moment. Because this wasn't about money. This was about seeing another human being. Really seeing them. But William's act of kindness had been witnessed by someone else in the diner. Someone whose heart was harder than his. Someone who saw an opportunity. and the night was about to take a dangerous turn. The warm glow inside Miller's family diner created an illusion of safety, but just outside its windows, the Atlanta night had grown colder and more dangerous. A few minutes after William paid the bill, the waitress returned to Sarah's booth, carrying a tray that made the girls gasp with delight. 2 enormous hot fudge sundaes topped with whipped cream and cherries, a plate of warm apple pie, and for Sarah a full dinner: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans and fresh bread. All of this, Sarah whispered in disbelief. For us? The waitress smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. Merry Christmas, she said simply. The girls dove into their desserts with pure joy, chocolate coating their lips as they laughed together. Sarah stared at the hot meal in front of her, overwhelmed. When was the last time someone had simply given her something without expecting anything in return? She picked up her fork with trembling hands and took her first real bite of food in 2 days. The taste was so good it almost hurt. Across the diner, William gathered his coat and briefcase, preparing to leave. His work here was done, or so he thought. He had no intention of revealing himself. The gift was meant to be anonymous, a small act of grace on a night that had left him feeling forgotten by his own family. But as he stood to leave, he noticed something that made him pause. 3 young men had entered the diner and taken a booth near the front. They were in their early 20s, wearing expensive sneakers and designer jackets. One of them had noticed Sarah and the girls. He was whispering to his friends, gesturing toward the booth, laughing quietly. William recognized that laugh. It was the sound of cruelty disguised as entertainment. He remained standing, watching carefully. One of the young men pulled out his phone and appeared to be filming Sarah and the children eating. His friends snickered, making comments William couldn't hear but could easily imagine. Look at this lady, acting like she won the lottery over some diner food. Probably hasn't eaten in days. Let's see what happens when they leave. William's jaw tightened. He had seen enough of the world to know where this was heading. 20 minutes later, Sarah wiped her mouth with a napkin, completely unaware of the attention on her. Her daughters had finished their sundaes and were leaning against her sleepily, their bellies full for the first time in days. Come on, girls, Sarah said gently. Time to head home. They slid out of the booth, and Sarah helped them into their thin jackets. She left $3 on the table as a tip, nearly all she had left, but she couldn't bring herself to leave, nothing for the waitress who had been kind at the end. As they walked toward the exit, the 3 young men stood up as well, following at a casual distance. William saw it all. He quickly gathered his things and followed. The moment Sarah and her daughters stepped outside, the brutal wind hit them. The temperature had dropped even further. Snow had begun to fall, coating the sidewalk in a thin layer of ice. Sarah gripped her daughter's hands tightly, moving as quickly as their small legs could manage. The bus stop was 6 blocks away. If they hurried they could catch the last bus home. But before they had gone even 2 blocks, footsteps echoed behind them. Yo, hold up. Sarah's entire body tensed. She knew that tone. She had heard it before in hospital parking lots late at night, in dark streets near the bus stop. She turned slowly. The 3 young men had followed them outside and were now blocking the sidewalk. Where you heading so fast? One of them asked, a cruel smile playing on his lips. We just wanted to congratulate you on that free meal back there. Sarah positioned herself between the men and her children. We don't want any trouble, she said firmly. Just let us pass. Relax, lady, another one laughed. We're not looking for trouble, we're looking for a donation. See, Christmas is expensive, you know. And it looks like you just saved some money on dinner. Maybe you could share the wealth. Maya began to cry softly. Zoe pressed herself against her mother's leg. I don't have anything to give you, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Please just let us go. One of the young men stepped closer, invading Sarah's space. Come on, sister, don't make this difficult. Empty your pockets and we'll all go home happy. Sarah's mind raced. She had $25 left. That was supposed to cover bus fare and anything for the girls to eat tomorrow. If she gave it up, they would have nothing. But if she refused, what would these men do? Would they hurt her children? Her hands began to shake, not from cold but from rage and helplessness. All the years of struggle, all the nights of going hungry so her girls could eat, all the humiliation of being looked down on, it all rose up in her throat like bile. "I said I don't have anything," Sarah repeated, her voice harder now. The young man's smile disappeared. "Wrong answer." He reached out to shove Sarah, and that's when a voice cut through the night like steel. "Step away from them, now." Everyone turned. William Harrison stood 10 feet away, his small frame wrapped in his expensive coat, his briefcase clutched firmly in one hand. His face was calm, but his eyes blazed with authority. The young men burst out laughing. "Old man, you better keep walking," one of them sneered. "This doesn't concern you." William didn't move. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away," he said, his voice cold and commanding in a way that came from decades of running boardrooms and negotiating with powerful men. "Take it, or what?" the leader mocked. "You gonna fight us, Grandpa? There's 3 of us and 1 of you." William reached into his coat pocket. For a moment the young men tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead he pulled out his phone, but he didn't dial the police. He dialed someone else entirely. "James, it's William Harrison," he said calmly into the phone. "I need you to send a patrol car to my location immediately. I'm at the corner of Peachtree and 5th. There's a situation that requires immediate attention." The young men exchanged confused glances. "Who's James?" one of them muttered. William lowered his phone. "James Crawford is the chief of police. He was my late wife's college roommate. We served on the hospital board together for 20 years. He'll be here in less than 3 minutes with multiple units." He paused, letting that sink in. "Or," he continued, "you can leave right now and we'll all forget this happened." The leader's bravado cracked. He looked at his friends, uncertainty creeping into his expression. In the distance, a siren began to wail. "That was fast," William said quietly. The 3 young men turned and ran, disappearing into the snowy darkness. Sarah stood frozen, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughters. She stared at the elderly man who had just saved them, unable to find words. William approached slowly. He knelt down in front of Maya and Zoe, his old knees protesting, his expensive coat touching the dirty snow. "Are you girls all right?" he asked gently. They nodded, still crying softly. He looked up at Sarah. "And you?" Sarah's legs finally gave out. She sank down onto the cold sidewalk, her back against a building wall, and buried her face in her hands. Years of holding everything together, years of staying strong, it all broke apart in that moment. "I couldn't protect them," she sobbed. "I couldn't even protect my own children." William sat down beside her, completely unconcerned about his coat or his age. "Yes, you could," he said firmly. "And you did. You stood between them and danger. That's what mothers do." Sarah shook her head. "But you had to save us. A stranger had to save us." "What kind of mother does that make me?" "It makes you human," William replied. "It makes you someone who needed help. There's no shame in that." A police car pulled up to the curb. An officer stepped out, young and professional. "Mr. Harrison," he asked. "Chief Crawford sent me." "Are you all right, sir?" "We're fine now, officer," William said, standing and brushing snow from his coat. "Just some young men who made poor choices. They've left the area." The officer took down a brief statement, then offered them all a ride. William looked at Sarah. "Where do you live?" Sarah gave an address in one of Atlanta's rougher neighborhoods, her voice thick with shame. "That's quite a distance," William observed. "Officer, could you drive this family home, please?" "Of course, sir." As they climbed into the warm police car, Maya looked up at William with wide eyes. "Are you an angel?" she asked simply. William's eyes filled with tears for the first time in years. "No, sweetheart," he whispered. "I'm just someone who should have been paying attention a long time ago." The police car drove away, leaving William standing alone on the snowy corner. But his night was far from over. Because what he had witnessed had awakened something inside him that had been sleeping for far too long. And by morning decisions would be made that would change not just Sarah's life, but his own as well. The police car's heater blasted warm air, but Sarah couldn't stop shaking. Maya and Zoe had fallen asleep almost immediately, their small bodies pressed against their mother in the back seat. The officer drove in respectful silence, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror with concern. When they pulled up in front of Sarah's apartment building, the officer's expression tightened. The complex was run down, with broken security lights and graffiti covering the walls. Several windows were boarded up. A group of men stood smoking on the corner, watching the police car with hard eyes. "Ma'am, are you sure you're going to be all right here?" the officer asked. Sarah nodded, too exhausted to feel embarrassed anymore. "We'll be fine, thank you for the ride." She carried Zoe, while Maya walked beside her, half asleep. They climbed 3 flights of stairs, the stairwell reeking of urine and mildew. Sarah unlocked their apartment door and ushered the girls inside. The apartment was freezing. The landlord had turned off the heat 2 days ago because Sarah was 3 weeks behind on rent. Their breath came out in visible puffs. Sarah tucked both girls into the single bed they shared, piling every blanket they owned on top of them. Within minutes, they were asleep again, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the evening. Sarah sat on the floor beside the bed, watching them sleep. The clock on the wall read 11:45. In 15 minutes, it would be Christmas Day. She thought about the elderly man who had paid for their meal, who had stood up to those men, who had looked at her children with genuine concern instead of judgment. She didn't even know his name. Silent tears rolled down Sarah's face. She was 32 years old, and she had never felt more like a failure. Her girls deserved so much more than this freezing apartment, these thin blankets, this constant fear and hunger. She pulled out her phone and looked at her bank account, $11.47. Rent was $850. Due 3 weeks ago. Tomorrow she would have to beg her landlord for one more extension. Again, tomorrow she would have to choose between electricity and food. Again, tomorrow she would have to explain to her daughters why they couldn't afford even the smallest Christmas presents. Again, Sarah buried her face in her hands and let herself break, just for a moment, in the darkness where her children couldn't see. Across the city, in a penthouse apartment overlooking downtown Atlanta, William Harrison stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, unable to sleep. The lights of the city twinkled below like a blanket of stars, beautiful and cold. His apartment was immaculate, professionally decorated, filled with expensive furniture that no one ever sat on. Photographs of his late wife lined the mantel. Pictures of his grandson Tyler at various ages, though the boy rarely visited anymore. He had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered. The image of Sarah and her daughters wouldn't leave his mind. The way she had positioned herself between those young men and her children. The way she had wept on the sidewalk, not from physical pain but from the unbearable weight of responsibility. He saw Catherine in her. His wife, the woman who had understood struggle in ways he never fully appreciated until she was gone. William walked to his study and sat down at his desk. He pulled out a leather-bound journal he hadn't opened in years. Inside were notes from the months after Catherine died. Plans he had made to honor her memory through charitable work. Plans he had never followed through on because grief made him retreat instead of reach out. Catherine had grown up poor, one of 6 children in a family that struggled to put food on the table. She had worked her way through nursing school, often going hungry so she could save money for textbooks. She had known what it meant to be invisible, to be judged, to feel like the world had decided you didn't matter. After they married and William's manufacturing business took off, Catherine had begged him to use their wealth to help people like her family. "Don't just write checks, William," she had said. "Get your hands dirty, see people, know them." He had promised her he would, but after she died, he had buried himself in work instead, keeping everyone at arm's length, writing checks from a distance to ease his guilt. More failures. More distance. More money substituting for presents. William closed the journal with shaking hands. He had spent 50 years building an empire, proving that a boy from a working-class family could compete with old money. He had been ruthless, brilliant, unstoppable. He had made decisions that affected thousands of lives, built factories that employed entire towns. But he had lost himself somewhere along the way. Lost the connection to the values Catherine had tried to teach him. He picked up his phone and stared at his grandson's last message. "Sorry again, Grandpa. The guys really wanted me at this party. Rain check. He typed a response. Tyler, when was the last time we had a real conversation? I'm 73 years old. How much time do you think I have left to know you? He deleted it without sending. Instead he opened a different contact. Patricia Holmes, his executive assistant who had worked for him for 30 years. It was nearly midnight on Christmas Eve, but he pressed dial anyway. Patricia answered on the third ring, alert despite the hour. Mr. Harrison, is everything all right? Patricia, I need you to do something for me, first thing after the holiday. William said, I need you to find someone. A woman named Sarah Mitchell, 2 young daughters, twins, about 7 years old. Living somewhere in the Bankhead area. I don't know more than that, but I need to find her. Patricia was silent for a moment. Sir, may I ask why? Oh. Because tonight I met someone who reminded me what my wife spent years trying to teach me. William said, his voice cracking. And I realized I've wasted 15 years being bitter and alone when I could have been honoring Catherine's memory by actually helping people. He paused. The Harrison Foundation has $40 million in assets, Patricia. We fund scholarships and medical research and all sorts of worthy causes, but it's all at arm's length. All safe, all comfortable. Catherine would have hated it. What are you planning to do? Patricia asked gently. I'm planning to do what I should have done 15 years ago, William replied. I'm planning to get my hands dirty. After they hung up, William sat in his study for a long time, staring at the photograph of Catherine on his desk. I'm sorry I took so long, he whispered to her image. But I'm ready now. I'm finally ready to do this right. Something had shifted inside him tonight. The walls he had built around his heart had developed cracks, and light was starting to seep through. But there was more to do, much more. He opened his laptop and began to type, making plans, organizing resources, preparing for the next step. Because if he had learned anything tonight, it was this: money meant nothing if you didn't use it to see people. Really see them, and Sarah Mitchell and her daughters were about to be seen in a way they never expected. Christmas morning arrived, cold and gray. Sarah woke on the floor beside her daughter's bed, her body aching from sleeping on the hard surface. Maya and Zoe were still asleep, bundled beneath their pile of thin blankets. She stood slowly, joints cracking, and walked to the small kitchen. The refrigerator hummed weakly, nearly empty inside, half a carton of milk that would expire tomorrow. 2 eggs, a bag of bread with 3 slices left. Sarah pulled out the bread and made 2 simple sandwiches with the eggs, saving the milk for the girls to drink. It would have to be enough. She was setting the sandwiches on the table when her phone rang. Unknown number. Sarah hesitated, then answered, "Hello, Miss Mitchell." A woman's voice, professional and warm. "My name is Patricia Holmes. I'm calling on behalf of William Harrison. Do you have a moment?" Sarah's heart began to race. "The man from last night, the one who helped us." "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Harrison would like to speak with you." "Oh." "Would you be available to meet him this afternoon at his office? He has a proposition he'd like to discuss." "I don't understand," Sarah stammered. "What kind of proposition?" "Mr. Harrison prefers to explain in person. Would 2 o'clock work for you?" Sarah looked around her shabby apartment. She had nowhere to be. Nothing to do except worry about rent and food and keeping her children warm. "Yes," she said. 2 o'clock is fine." Patricia gave her the address, a building in downtown Atlanta that Sarah recognized as one of the most expensive office towers in the city. After she hung up, Sarah stood in stunned silence. Why would a wealthy man want to meet with her? What could he possibly want? When the girls woke up, Sarah gave them their sandwiches and the last of the milk. They ate quietly, still tired from the emotional upheaval of the night before. "Mama," Maya said softly, "are we going to have a real Christmas?" Sarah's heart broke. "I know it's not much this year, girls. But we have each other. That's what matters most." Zoe nodded, trying to be brave. "The food last night was like a present." "That man was nice," Maya added. "I hope he has a good Christmas." Sarah pulled them both into a hug, fighting back tears. Her children were so good, so grateful for the smallest kindness. They deserved so much more than she could give them. At 1:30, Sarah asked her neighbor, Mrs. Washington, an elderly woman who had always been kind to the girls, if she could watch them for a couple hours. She agreed immediately, delighted to spend time with Maya and Zoe. Sarah put on her only nice blouse, wrinkled and slightly faded from too many washings. She took the bus downtown, watching the gleaming towers grow closer through the window. The building Patricia had directed her to was even more intimidating up close. All glass and steel, with a marble lobby and security guards in uniform. Sarah felt completely out of place in her worn clothes and scuffed shoes. But when she gave her name at the reception desk, the guard's entire demeanor changed. Miss Mitchell, yes, Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 48th floor. The elevator rose so smoothly Sarah barely felt it moving. When the doors opened, she stepped into an office suite, unlike anything she had ever seen. Original artwork on the walls, thick carpet beneath her feet, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Patricia Holmes, a black woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an elegant suit, greeted her immediately. Miss Mitchell, welcome, please follow me. She led Sarah down a hallway to a corner office. Inside, William Harrison stood by the window, looking out at the city. He turned when they entered. Sarah, he said warmly, walking toward her with his hand extended. Thank you for coming. Sarah shook his hand, overwhelmed. Mr. Harrison, I wanted to thank you for last night. For everything. I don't know how to repay you. Sit please, William said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. And there's nothing to repay. What happened last night was simply one human being helping another. Sarah sat on the edge of the chair, too nervous to relax. William took the seat across from her. I asked you here because I have a question, Sarah. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Sarah said cautiously, if someone offered you a chance to change your circumstances, not through charity but through partnership, would you take it? Sarah frowned, confused. I'm not sure I understand. William leaned forward. I spent last night thinking about you and your daughters. About the kind of woman who goes hungry so her children can eat. About the kind of mother who stands between danger and her girls without hesitation. That's character, Sarah. Real character, and character is something money can't buy. He paused. I also thought about my own life, he continued. About how I've spent 15 years building wealth while losing connection to the people who matter. About how my own grandson can't spare 2 hours for dinner with his grandfather. About how I've written checks for millions but never actually helped another person with my own hands. Sarah listened, still uncertain where this was going. My late wife Catherine, she came from poverty. William said, his voice softening. She knew what struggle looked like. Before she died, she made me promise to use our wealth to help people like her family. People who are invisible to society, but I failed that promise. I let grief turn me into someone who wrote checks instead of actually seeing people. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk to Sarah. I want to offer you a position, Sarah, William said. The Harrison Foundation needs someone to lead our community outreach programs. Someone who understands what real struggle looks like. Someone who knows what it means to choose between rent and food. Someone who can identify the families who need help and make sure resources actually reach them instead of getting lost in bureaucracy. Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were program descriptions, budget allocations, community impact reports. The position comes with a salary of $65,000 a year, William said. Health insurance for you and your girls. And housing, a 3-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. The foundation owns several properties. One of them is yours for as long as you hold this position, with a long-term lease agreement held in an irrevocable trust to ensure stability. Sarah's vision blurred. She couldn't have heard that correctly. $65,000, health insurance, safe housing. Why, she whispered. Why would you do this for me? William's eyes filled with tears. Because last night when I watched you sacrifice for your children, I saw my wife. Catherine worked as a nurse for 30 years, and she never stopped seeing people the way you see your daughters. With complete selfless love. He wiped his eyes. She died 15 years ago, and I've been sleepwalking through life ever since. My grandson barely knows me. I have no real relationships, no real purpose. I've just been existing, writing checks to ease my guilt but never actually connecting with anyone. His voice trembled. If I had stayed silent last night, if I had just paid your bill and walked away, I would have missed this. I would have missed the chance to finally honor Catherine's memory the right way. Not with money but with presence. Sarah couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face. But I need to be clear about something, William said firmly. This isn't charity. I need you, Sarah. I need your perspective. I need your honesty. I need someone who will tell me when I'm making decisions from an ivory tower instead of from reality. This foundation is going to help people, truly help them, but only if someone like you is guiding it. He extended his hand. So what do you say? Will you partner with me? Sarah stared at his hand, then at his face, then at the folder in her lap. Her entire body was shaking. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I'll do it. They shook hands, and Sarah Mitchell's life changed forever. But neither of them knew that this was just the beginning. That their partnership would face challenges neither expected, and that the real test of their commitment was still to come. The first week of Sarah's new position was overwhelming. William had arranged everything with remarkable efficiency. The apartment was ready immediately, fully furnished with everything Sarah and the girls could need. The long-term lease was in Sarah's name, held in a trust that protected it even if circumstances changed, a symbol of dignity rather than dependency. Moving day came on December 28th. Sarah stood in the doorway of the 3-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Decatur, unable to believe it was real. Maya and Zoe ran from room to room shouting with joy. Mama, we each get our own room. There's a real kitchen. With a big refrigerator. The heat works, it's so warm. Mrs. Washington, who had helped pack their few belongings, wiped tears from her eyes. This is a blessing, Sarah. A real blessing. Sarah walked through the apartment in a daze. Clean walls, working appliances, windows that locked properly. A bathroom with hot water that didn't run out after 3 minutes. On the kitchen counter she found a note in elegant handwriting. Sarah, welcome home. This is not charity. This is what you've earned through your character, and what your girls deserve through their mother's love. The foundation office expects you Monday at 9. Take this weekend to settle in. William. That night Sarah tucked her daughters into their own beds for the first time in their lives. They had been sharing a single bed in their old apartment since they were toddlers. Mama, is this really ours? Zoe asked, her voice small and uncertain. Can they take it away? Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. This is ours, baby. Because I'm going to work hard every day to earn it. This is a new start for all of us. Maya looked worried. What kind of work are you going to do? I'm going to help other families like us. Sarah explained. Families who are struggling and need support. I'm going to make sure they get the help they need. Like the nice man helped us? Maya asked. Exactly like that. Both girls smiled, finally relaxed enough to close their eyes and sleep. Sarah returned to the living room and sat on the couch, still not quite believing any of this was real. She pulled out her phone and looked at her bank account. William had arranged for her first paycheck to be advanced so she could buy essentials. $4,000 sat in her account, more money than she had ever had at one time in her entire life. She could pay off her debts, buy her girls new clothes, get them real winter coats, stock the refrigerator with actual food. Sarah covered her face with her hands and wept, but for the first time in years, they were tears of gratitude instead of despair. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Sarah put on a new suit that William had arranged to be delivered, navy blue and perfectly fitted. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. The girls were enrolled in their new school, starting after New Year's. For now, Mrs. Washington had agreed to watch them during the day, though Sarah was already making plans to find reliable after-school care. The Harrison Foundation offices were in the same building as William's business headquarters, but on a different floor. When Sarah stepped off the elevator, Patricia Holmes was waiting for her. "Good morning, Sarah," she said warmly. "Ready for your first day?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, her stomach tight with nerves. Patricia led her through the foundation offices. They were smaller than she expected, just a few rooms with dated furniture and outdated computers. "As you can see, we have a lot of work to do," Patricia said. "The foundation has been essentially dormant for several years. We have the funds, Mr. Harrison made sure of that, but we haven't had the vision or the leadership to use them effectively." She showed Sarah to her office, a simple room with a desk, computer and window overlooking the city. "This is yours," she said. "Your first assignment is to review the Foundation's past programs and identify which ones actually made a difference versus which ones just looked good on paper. Mr. Harrison wants your honest assessment. Don't hold back." Sarah spent that first day reading through files, overwhelmed by the amount of information. Scholarship programs that had funded hundreds of students, job training initiatives that had helped people get certified in various trades, housing assistance programs that had kept families from becoming homeless. But as she dug deeper, she found problems. Scholarship money sometimes went to students who didn't need it because the selection criteria favored those who already had advantages. Job training programs taught skills that were outdated and didn't match current market needs. Housing assistance was so bureaucratic that people gave up trying to navigate it. By the end of the day, Sarah's head was spinning. This was so much bigger than she had imagined. William appeared at her office door at 5:30. "How was your first day?" Sarah looked up, exhausted. "Overwhelming. There's so much to learn." "Walk with me," William said. They rode the elevator down together, then walked through the downtown streets as the sun set. The Christmas decorations were still up, twinkling in the growing darkness. "Tell me what you're thinking," William said. Sarah chose her words carefully. "I think the foundation had good intentions, but somewhere along the way it started serving the wrong people. Not the ones who needed help most, but the ones who were easiest to help." William nodded. "Go on." "The scholarship program, for example. The criteria require students to have a 3.5 GPA or higher, participation in extracurricular activities, and teacher recommendations. But the kids who really need scholarships are the ones working after-school jobs to help feed their families, the ones who don't have time for extracurriculars, the ones whose schools are so underfunded they barely have teachers, let alone ones who can write glowing recommendations." "You're saying we're helping middle-class kids get to college instead of giving poor kids a chance to escape poverty?" "Yes," Sarah said. "Exactly that." William stopped walking and turned to face her. "Then change it. That's why you're here, Sarah. To tell me the truth and then help me fix it." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and William worked together to redesign the Foundation's programs. They visited schools in struggling neighborhoods. They met with families who were barely surviving. They talked to community leaders who explained what their neighborhoods really needed versus what well-meaning outsiders thought they needed. Sarah discovered she had a gift for connecting with people, for making them feel heard and seen. Her own experience of struggle gave her credibility that no amount of education could provide. But not everyone was happy about Sarah's new role. At a foundation board meeting in mid-January, Sarah presented her recommendations for overhauling the scholarship program. Several board members, older men who had been involved with the foundation for decades, pushed back hard. "These changes would lower our standards," one of them argued. "We've always funded excellence." "No," Sarah said firmly, "you've funded privilege. There's a difference." The room went silent. "Excellence looks different when you're starting from nothing," Sarah continued. "A kid who maintains a 3.0 GPA while working 20 hours a week to help pay rent is showing more excellence than a kid with a 4.0 whose biggest challenge is choosing which college prep tutor to hire." Another board member frowned. "Miss Mitchell, I understand you bring a certain perspective to this work, but you lack the experience to understand how philanthropy operates." William's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Gentlemen, let me be clear. Sarah Mitchell was hired specifically because she understands what this foundation has been getting wrong for years. If you're not willing to listen to her, perhaps it's time for you to step down from the board." The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Sarah felt her face grow hot. She hadn't expected William to defend her so forcefully, but she also hadn't expected the board to dismiss her so completely. The meeting ended badly, with 2 board members resigning on the spot. Afterward, Sarah found William in his office. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to cause problems." William shook his head. "You didn't cause problems, you exposed them. Those men have been using this foundation to make themselves feel good while doing minimal actual good. That ends now." But the conflict had rattled Sarah. She was used to being dismissed, used to being looked down on. But she had hoped that this position, this new life, would be different. That night, lying in her comfortable bed in her safe apartment, Sarah wondered if she was truly ready for this role. If she truly belonged in William's world. The answer would come sooner than she expected, in a way neither of them anticipated. February brought a cold snap to Atlanta. Ice glazed the streets and frozen rain tapped against windows. But inside the Harrison Foundation offices, things were heating up. Sarah had spent the past month implementing changes, and the results were beginning to show. The new scholarship program had identified 28 students from struggling neighborhoods who had been previously overlooked. The job training initiative was being redesigned to teach skills that actually led to employment: coding, medical assistance, commercial driving. But success bred resentment. A local news article about the foundation's transformation quoted Sarah extensively, praising her authentic understanding of poverty and her revolutionary approach to philanthropy. The article included a photo of Sarah and William standing together outside the foundation offices. Within hours, the backlash began. Social media posts questioned Sarah's qualifications. Anonymous comments suggested she was unqualified, that William was being taken advantage of, that the foundation was wasting money on handouts instead of hand-ups. More troubling were the accusations that appeared on a local news blog, claims that Sarah had misrepresented her background, that she was secretly wealthy and only pretending to have struggled, that the whole story about meeting William at the diner was fabricated for publicity. The allegations were completely false, but they spread quickly. Sarah sat in her office, reading the comments on her computer screen, feeling sick. Years of hard work, years of sacrifice, reduced to cruel speculation and lies. Patricia appeared in her doorway. "Don't read that garbage," she said firmly. "It's not worth your time." "But people believe it," Sarah said quietly. "They think I'm a fraud. People who want to believe it will believe it no matter what you say. People who know the truth won't be swayed by anonymous internet comments." But the damage continued. By the end of the week, 2 major donors had pulled their funding from the foundation, citing concerns about leadership direction. William called an emergency meeting. "I want to address this head-on," he said. "We're going to hold a press conference. Sarah will tell her story, the real story, and will answer questions." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "I'm not good at public speaking. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make it worse?" William placed his hand on her shoulder. "You just need to be yourself. Tell the truth. That's all." The press conference was scheduled for the following Monday. Sarah spent the weekend rehearsing with Patricia, but the more she practiced, the more artificial it sounded. "Just forget the script," Patricia finally said. "Speak from your heart." Monday arrived gray and rainy. The press conference was held in the foundation's main conference room. Cameras, reporters, microphones everywhere. Sarah sat at the table next to William, her hands shaking beneath the surface. William made a brief statement, then turned it over to Sarah. She looked out at the sea of faces, the cameras, the recording devices. Her mind went blank. All the rehearsed words disappeared. Then she saw Maya and Zoe sitting in the back row with Mrs. Washington. Patricia had arranged for them to be there, though Sarah hadn't known. Seeing her daughters gave her strength. "I'm going to tell you about Christmas Eve," Sarah began, her voice quiet but steady. "About the night I walked my daughters 6 blocks in freezing weather to a diner where I planned to buy them one small meal and pretend I wasn't hungry." The room fell silent. "I'm going to tell you about having $28 to my name and being 3 weeks behind on rent. About my girls sharing the only bed we had while I slept on the floor. About the shame of being looked at like I was less than human because my clothes were worn and my children's jackets were too thin." Her voice grew stronger. "I'm going to tell you about an elderly man I had never met who saw me not as a charity case but as a human being. Who didn't just pay for a meal but stood between my children and danger. who offered me not a handout but a partnership. She looked directly at the cameras. Everything that's been written about me, the accusations, the doubts, they're coming from people who have never been truly desperate, who have never had to choose between feeding their children and keeping a roof over their heads, who think poverty is a moral failing instead of a circumstance. Sarah paused. Mr. Harrison didn't save me, he gave me a chance to save myself. And now I'm using that chance to help others do the same. If that makes me unqualified in some people's eyes, so be it. But the families we're helping don't care about my credentials. They care that someone finally understands what they're going through. She sat back, emotionally drained. The reporters erupted with questions, but William raised his hand. We'll take 3 questions, and then we're done. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution stood. Miss Mitchell, what do you say to critics who claim the foundation's new direction is lowering standards? Sarah leaned forward. I say we're not lowering standards. We're expanding our definition of excellence to include the kind of strength it takes to survive against impossible odds. That's a standard most people, including most critics, could never meet. Another reporter, Mr. Harrison, do you have any concerns about Miss Mitchell's lack of traditional experience in philanthropy? William's answer was swift and sharp. Traditional philanthropy has failed the people who need it most for generations. If lack of traditional experience means actually helping people instead of just writing impressive annual reports, then I consider it an asset, not a liability. The final question came from a young black female reporter. Miss Mitchell, what would you say to other people who are struggling right now? Sarah thought of her daughters in the back row, of her old apartment with no heat, of the nights she'd gone to bed hungry. I'd say that your struggle doesn't define your worth, that needing help doesn't make you weak, and that somewhere, even if you can't see it yet, there's someone who will see you for who you really are. Don't give up before they get the chance. The press conference ended. As cameras were packed up and reporters filed out, several people approached Sarah privately to share their own stories of struggle and to thank her for her honesty. That evening, the news coverage was mixed. Some outlets praised Sarah's authenticity. Others continued to question her qualifications, but the conversation had shifted. People were talking about poverty, about dignity, about what it really means to help. Most importantly, the families the foundation was serving weren't listening to the critics. They were showing up to programs, filling out scholarship applications, asking for help, because they recognized one of their own. A week later, William received a call from a major philanthropic organization based in New York. They had seen the press conference and wanted to partner with the Harrison Foundation, offering a $2 million grant to expand their programs. They specifically mentioned you, William told Sarah. They said your approach is what philanthropy has been missing. But Sarah was learning that success brought its own challenges. The more visible she became, the more pressure she felt to be perfect, to prove she deserved this opportunity. One evening in late February, she stayed late at the office, working on a proposal. William found her still at her desk at 9 o'clock. Go home, Sarah, he said gently. Your girls need you more than this paperwork does. I just want to make sure everything is perfect, Sarah said, her eyes bloodshot from staring at the computer screen. William sat down across from her. Can I tell you something about my wife Catherine? Sarah looked up. She worked herself nearly to exhaustion trying to prove she belonged in the world of professional nursing, William said. She came from poverty, and she thought if she just worked harder, sacrificed more, people would finally see her worth. But she was already worthy, Sarah, she just couldn't see it. He paused. Don't make her mistake. Don't let this work consume you. You already proved yourself the moment you walked into that diner and ordered food for your children instead of yourself. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. I'm just afraid of losing all this, of waking up and finding out it was all a dream. It's not a dream, William said firmly. It's real, and it's yours because you earned it. Not through this job, but through years of being a good mother against impossible odds. This is just the world finally catching up to what you've always been. That night, Sarah went home and spent hours playing board games with Maya and Zoe, laughing until their sides hurt. Because William was right, her worth wasn't determined by her work. It had always been there, in the mother she had been even when she had nothing to give but love. But the biggest test was still ahead, a test that would require both Sarah and William to confront their deepest fears and decide what they were truly willing to sacrifice for each other. March arrived with unexpected warmth, as if Atlanta couldn't decide whether winter was truly over. Cherry blossoms bloomed early in Piedmont Park. Children played outside without jackets. But inside Sarah Mitchell's world, a storm was gathering. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah was reviewing scholarship applications when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Miss Mitchell, a man's voice, official and cold. This is Dale Morrison from Child Protective Services. We need to schedule a home visit to assess the living conditions of Maya and Zoe Mitchell. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What? Why? What's this about? We've received a complaint alleging that your children are living in circumstances that may not be in their best interest. Someone has suggested that your current housing and employment situation may be temporary or unstable. Who made this complaint? Sarah demanded. That information is confidential. The visit is mandatory. We can schedule it for this Thursday at 4 p.m., or we can show up unannounced. Your choice. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. Thursday at 4 is fine. After she hung up, she sat frozen at her desk, panic rising in her throat. Someone had called CPS on her. Someone was trying to take her children away. Patricia appeared at her door and immediately knew something was wrong. Sarah, what happened? She told her about the call, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia's face hardened with anger. This is retaliation. Someone who doesn't like the changes you're making is going after you where they know it will hurt most. But they can't actually take my girls, can they? Sarah asked desperately. I have a good job now, a safe apartment, health insurance. Everything is stable. That doesn't matter if they want to find problems. Patricia said grimly. CPS investigations can be subjective. If the investigator comes in with a bias, they can twist anything. Sarah buried her face in her hands. Just when she thought she was finally safe, finally secure, someone was trying to destroy everything. When William learned about the situation, his response was immediate and fierce. We're getting you a lawyer, he said. The best family law attorney in Atlanta. This is harassment, and we're going to fight it. But what if they find something wrong? Sarah said, her old fears resurfacing. What if they decide I'm not a good enough mother? William gripped her shoulders. Sarah Mitchell, you are one of the best mothers I have ever known. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you and your daughters can see how much you love each other. Don't let fear make you forget that. The lawyer William hired, a woman named Diane Foster, was intimidating and brilliant. She met with Sarah immediately to prepare for the home visit. The investigator will look at everything, Diane explained. Where the girls sleep, what food you have, whether the apartment is clean and safe. They'll interview the girls separately to make sure they're not being coached. They'll ask about discipline, about your work schedule, about who watches them when you're not home. I have nothing to hide, Sarah said. I'm a good mother. I know you are, Diane replied. But in situations like this, good isn't always enough. We need to be perfect. The next 2 days were torture. Sarah cleaned the apartment until it sparkled. She stocked the refrigerator with fresh, healthy food. She reviewed every aspect of her parenting, looking for potential criticisms. Mrs. Washington agreed to be present during the visit to vouch for the girls' care. Patricia prepared documentation of Sarah's employment and benefits. But underneath all the preparation, Sarah felt the old familiar terror returning. The terror of being judged, of being found lacking, of losing everything that mattered. Thursday arrived too quickly. At 3:45, Sarah sat on the couch with Maya and Zoe, trying to stay calm. Mama, why is a lady from the government coming? Zoe asked nervously. Sarah chose her words carefully. She just wants to make sure you girls are happy and healthy. Just answer her questions honestly. Okay. Tell her the truth about everything. Are they going to take us away? Maya asked, her voice small and frightened. Sarah pulled them both close. No one is taking you anywhere. We're a family and we're staying together. The doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock. Dale Morrison was in his mid-50s, with a tired face and suspicious eyes. He introduced himself curtly and began walking through the apartment, making notes on a tablet. He inspected the girls' bedrooms, opened the refrigerator, checked the bathroom, examined the smoke detectors and locks on the windows. Then he sat down to interview the girls separately, while Sarah and Mrs. Washington waited in the kitchen, Sarah's heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. After 30 minutes, Morrison called Sarah back into the living room. "Miss Mitchell, I'm going to be frank with you," Morrison said. "This complaint appears to be malicious. There's no evidence of neglect or unsafe conditions. Your children are clearly well cared for and happy." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully she thought her legs might give out. However, Morrison continued, "There is one concern. Your children mentioned that their living situation changed dramatically about 2 months ago. They talked about a previous apartment with no heat, not enough food, considerable instability." Sarah's relief turned back to fear. "That was before I got my current job. Things are completely different now." "I understand that," Morrison said, "but my job is to assess long-term stability. How do I know this job will last? How do I know this apartment is permanent? What happens if your wealthy benefactor decides to end your employment?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. This was exactly what she had feared all along, that everyone would see her as someone playing dress-up in a life she didn't deserve. "Mr. Harrison isn't my benefactor," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He's my employer. I work for the foundation. I earn my salary." "But you must admit your situation is unusual," Morrison pressed. "A significant change in circumstances in a very short time. That kind of instability, even positive instability, can be concerning from a child welfare perspective." Sarah felt her world tilting. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for, was about to crumble because someone had made a phone call. That's when William Harrison walked through the door. He had been waiting in his car outside, and Patricia had texted him when things started going badly. "Mr. Morrison," William said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "I'm William Harrison. Perhaps you've heard of me." Morrison stood, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Harrison, this is a private investigation. And I'm here to provide context," William replied smoothly. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Morrison. "This is Miss Mitchell's employment contract. It's a 5-year guaranteed contract with the Harrison Foundation, with options for renewal. It cannot be terminated without cause, and it includes substantial severance provisions if it is." He pulled out another document. "This is the long-term lease agreement for the apartment Miss Mitchell and her daughters occupy. It's held in an irrevocable trust specifically established for their benefit. Even if Miss Mitchell's employment ended tomorrow, which it won't, her housing would remain secure for a minimum of 10 years. Morrison flipped through the documents, his expression changing. William wasn't finished. "You'll also find letters here from Miss Mitchell's supervisor, myself, attesting to her exceptional performance. References from community members. Documentation from the girls' school showing excellent attendance and progress. Medical records showing regular checkups and current vaccinations." He fixed Morrison with a steady gaze. "Miss Mitchell's children are not living in instability. They're living in a carefully structured, legally protected situation that ensures their welfare regardless of circumstances. If you have any further questions about that, I encourage you to contact my attorneys." Morrison closed the folder and stood. "I think I have everything I need, Mr. Harrison. Miss Mitchell, I'll be filing a report that finds no evidence of neglect or unsafe conditions. The case will be closed." After Morrison left, Sarah collapsed onto the couch, emotionally destroyed. Maya and Zoe immediately climbed onto her lap, hugging her tightly. William sat down beside them. "It's over, Sarah. They can't hurt you, but they almost did," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "They almost took my girls because someone thought I didn't deserve this life. They didn't take them," William said firmly. "And they never will, because you're not alone anymore, Sarah. You have resources now. You have protection. You have people who will fight for you." Sarah looked at him through tears. Why do you keep protecting me?" William's own eyes filled with tears. "Because I failed my wife. Catherine begged me to use our wealth to help people, to really see them and know them, but after she died I retreated. I wrote checks from a distance and told myself that was enough. I can't bring Catherine back, but I can make sure you and your daughters don't suffer because of someone else's cruelty." That night, after the girls were asleep, Sarah and William sat in her living room exhausted. "Who do you think made the call?" Sarah asked. "Does it matter?" William replied. "Someone who felt threatened by change. Someone who wanted to see you fail. The world is full of people like that." "How do you deal with it?" Sarah asked. How do you keep going when people are constantly trying to tear you down? William was quiet for a long moment. You find your why, he finally said, your reason for doing this work. Mine used to be building wealth, proving myself to people who looked down on me because I came from nothing. But that why was hollow. It left me successful and alone. He looked at Sarah. You gave me a new why, Sarah. You and your girls reminded me what actually matters. Not wealth or power or reputation, but connection, impact, using what you have to lift others up. That's worth fighting for. Sarah nodded slowly. My why has always been clear. They're sleeping in the next room. Then hold on to that, William said. When the world tries to make you doubt yourself, remember why you're doing this, not to prove anything to anyone, but to give your daughters the life they deserve. The crisis had passed, but it had changed something fundamental between Sarah and William. They were no longer just employer and employee, or even just partners in the foundation's work. They had become family, and families protect each other, no matter what. Spring arrived in Atlanta with an explosion of color. Dogwood trees bloomed white and pink. Azaleas turned entire neighborhoods into gardens. The city seemed to shake off winter and embrace possibility. Inside the Harrison Foundation offices, that sense of possibility was becoming reality. By late April, the Transform Scholarship Program had helped 32 students from struggling neighborhoods secure funding for college. The Job Training Initiative had placed 28 people in stable employment. The Housing Assistance Program had kept 11 families from eviction. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't tell the real story. The real story was in the faces of the people they helped. The single father who cried when he learned his son could afford college. The formerly incarcerated woman who got her first legitimate job in 8 years. The family who didn't have to choose between rent and medicine anymore. Sarah kept photographs of these people on her office wall. She needed the reminder that this work wasn't abstract. It was about real lives, real families, real hope. One morning in late April, Patricia rushed into Sarah's office with urgent news. Sarah, there's a family downstairs. They just walked in off the street. The father is desperate, and he specifically asked for you. Sarah immediately went down to the foundation's reception area. There she found a young white man, probably in his late 20s, with 2 small children clinging to him. He was trying to hold himself together, but tears kept slipping down his face. Please, he said when he saw Sarah. I heard you help people. I don't know where else to go. Sarah sat down beside him. Tell me what's happening. His name was Daniel Cooper. His wife had left 6 months ago, unable to handle the stress of poverty and motherhood. She had simply disappeared one day, leaving him with their 2 children, ages 4 and 6. Daniel had been working as a delivery driver, but his car had broken down 3 weeks ago. Without a car, he couldn't work. Without work, he couldn't pay rent. He was facing eviction in 5 days. I have nowhere to go, Daniel sobbed. My family disowned me when I married my wife because they said she wasn't good enough for me. I can't go crawling back to them. The shelters are full. I just need time to save up for car repairs so I can work again, but no one will give me that time. Sarah listened to his story, and she saw herself. She saw the same desperation, the same impossible choices, the same system that punished people for circumstances beyond their control. How much do you owe in back rent? She asked. $1,900, Daniel said. And I need about $800 for car repairs. It might as well be $1 million. I'll never be able to pay it. Sarah made a decision. Wait here. She went back upstairs and found William in his office. I need emergency authorization to access the Foundation's Housing Assistance Fund, she said. There's a family downstairs who needs help right now. William didn't hesitate. How much? $1,900 for back rent. About $800 for car repairs, so he can get back to work. Maybe some assistance with childcare. Approved, William said immediately. What do you need from me? Just trust me, Sarah said. I know what I'm doing. Over the next 2 weeks the foundation worked with Daniel. His rent was paid, his car was repaired. Sarah connected him with a subsidized childcare program, so he could work without worry. Patricia helped him find a better-paying delivery job with benefits. But Sarah did something else too, something that had nothing to do with the foundation. She gave Daniel her phone number. If you need help, call me, she said. Not the foundation, me, because I've been exactly where you are, and I know how lonely it feels. You're not alone anymore. Daniel looked at her with tears streaming down his face. Why are you doing this? Because someone did it for me, Sarah said simply. That night Sarah told Maya and Zoe about Daniel and his children. There's a family that needed help today, she explained. Just like we needed help at Christmas, and now we got to be the ones who helped them. Maya thought about this seriously. Does that mean we're not poor anymore, Mama? Sarah considered the question carefully. We're not struggling like we used to be, but being poor isn't just about money, sweetheart. It's about feeling like you don't matter, like no one sees you, and I never want us to forget what that feels like, because remembering helps us see other people who are invisible to everyone else. Zoe nodded, like Mr. Harrison saw us. Exactly like that, Sarah said. The following week, William invited Sarah to lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown. When she arrived, she was surprised to find another person at the table, a young man in his mid-20s with an uncertain smile. William stood and made introductions. Sarah, I'd like you to meet my grandson Tyler. Sarah shook hands with him, understanding immediately how significant this moment was. William had told her about Tyler, about the distance between them, about the canceled dinners and empty promises. Tyler and I had a long conversation recently, William explained. About family, about what matters, about not waiting until it's too late to actually know the people you love. Tyler nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. Grandpa told me about you and your daughters, about Christmas Eve, about everything you've been doing at the foundation. He paused. It made me realize I've been taking him for granted, treating him like an ATM instead of a person. Tyler's going to start volunteering at the foundation, William said, pride evident in his voice. He wants to learn what we're doing. Get involved. Sarah smiled warmly. We'd be glad to have you. Over lunch, the conversation flowed more easily than William had experienced with his grandson in years. Tyler asked thoughtful questions about the foundation's work. He shared his own ideas about how to reach younger donors. He even apologized directly to William for all the missed dinners, the broken promises. After lunch, as they walked out together, Tyler pulled Sarah aside. Thank you, he said quietly, for waking my grandfather up, for reminding him that life is about more than board meetings and quarterly reports. He's different now, happier. Sarah shook her head. He did that himself. I just showed up at the right time. Maybe, Tyler said, but sometimes showing up at the right time is exactly what someone needs. In early May, the foundation held its first annual gala, a fundraising event designed to expand their programs even further. Sarah was nervous about attending, uncomfortable with the idea of rubbing shoulders with Atlanta's wealthy elite, but William insisted. These people need to see you, he said. They need to understand that philanthropy isn't about writing checks from a distance. It's about real relationships with real people. The gala was held at a historic mansion in Buckhead. As Sarah walked in wearing an elegant dress that still felt strange on her body, she was overwhelmed by the opulence. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, women in designer gowns, men in expensive tuxedos. She felt like an imposter. But then something remarkable happened. As Sarah moved through the room, people approached her, not to judge, but to thank her. A businesswoman whose company had partnered with the job training program said Sarah's story had inspired the partnership. A philanthropist said Sarah's press conference had challenged her to rethink her entire approach to giving. A university dean said he was using Sarah's scholarship program redesign as a case study in his nonprofit management program. At the podium, William gave a speech about the foundation's transformation. Then he called Sarah up to speak. Her heart pounded as she approached the microphone. Hundreds of faces looked up at her expectantly. She thought about that Christmas Eve walking through the cold with Maya and Zoe, believing she had failed them. She thought about the diner, the fear, the shame of ordering one small meal. She thought about William, this remarkable man who had seen past her circumstances to her character. 6 months ago, Sarah began, her voice steady. I was a mother who couldn't afford to feed her children. Tonight I'm standing in front of you in a dress I would have been too afraid to even touch back then. That transformation isn't a fairy tale. It's what happens when someone believes in you. She looked at William. But here's what I've learned. I didn't need to be saved. None of us do. What we need is to be seen, to be valued, to be given a chance to show what we're capable of when the barriers are removed. She paused. The families we serve at the Harrison Foundation don't need charity. They need partnership. They need someone to believe that their struggle doesn't define their worth. And they need resources distributed with dignity instead of judgment. Her voice grew stronger. Mr. Harrison taught me that real philanthropy isn't about feeling good about yourself. It's about making yourself uncomfortable enough to actually change systems instead of just putting band-aids on symptoms. It's about building relationships instead of maintaining distance. It's about recognizing that the person you're helping might have more to teach you than you have to teach them. The room was silent. So when you write your checks tonight, Sarah concluded, I want you to think about something. You're not just funding programs. You're investing in human potential that society has decided to overlook. You're saying that every person deserves dignity, opportunity, and hope. And you're committing to seeing people really seeing them instead of looking past them. She stepped back from the microphone. For a moment, there was silence. Then the room erupted in applause. As Sarah returned to her table, William stood and embraced her. That, he whispered, is exactly what this work is about. The gala raised $475,000. But more importantly, it changed conversations. People left that night thinking differently about poverty, about philanthropy, about their role in creating change. As the event wound down, Sarah stepped outside for air. She stood on the mansion's terrace, looking out at the Atlanta skyline twinkling in the darkness. William joined her. Quite a view, he said. Still can't believe this is my life now, Sarah admitted. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Sarah, William said eventually, I have something to tell you. Tyler and I have been talking, really talking, for the first time in years. He wants to get more involved, not just with the foundation but with me, with family. Sarah smiled. That's wonderful. He's also agreed to join the foundation's board, William continued. Along with someone else I'd like to add. You. Sarah turned to him in shock. Me, on the board? You're already leading this organization in every way that matters, William said. It's time that was formalized. You deserve a seat at the table, Sarah. Not as someone we're helping, but as a leader in your own right. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. I never thought, she began, her voice breaking. I never imagined anything like this could happen. William placed his hand on her shoulder. That's because the world taught you not to imagine. It taught you that people like you don't get seats at tables like this. But you were always worthy of it, Sarah. The world just needed to catch up. 3 weeks later, on a warm Saturday in late May, Sarah did something she had been planning for months. She took Maya and Zoe back to the diner where everything had changed. They walked through the same doors, sat in the same booth. The same waitress from Christmas Eve was working. When she saw them, recognition lit up her face. I remember you, she said softly. The little family from Christmas. Sarah smiled. We wanted to come back and say thank you. That night changed our lives. She ordered burgers and milkshakes for the girls, a full meal for herself. When the check came, it was $26. Sarah pulled out her wallet and placed a $100 bill on the table. The 26 is for the meal, she said. The rest is for someone else who needs it. Someone who comes in here hungry and scared, trying to feed their family on too little money. Use it to help them, pay it forward. The waitress's eyes filled with tears. I'll make sure it goes to the right people, she promised. As they walked out of the diner, Zoe asked, Mama, why did you give extra money? Sarah knelt down to her daughter's eye level. Because someone gave us more than we expected when we needed it most. Now it's our turn to do the same for someone else. That's how kindness works, girls. It doesn't stop with you, it keeps going. Maya thought about this seriously. So the man who helped us, he probably got helped by someone too. Maybe, Sarah said. Or maybe he was trying to help someone he couldn't help before. Either way, the kindness keeps moving, touching more and more people. That night, back in their apartment, Sarah tucked her daughters into their beds. As she turned out the light in Maya's room, her daughter called out softly, Mama, are we going to be okay now? Forever? Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. I don't know what forever looks like, baby, but I know we're going to be okay today, and tomorrow, and the day after that, and we're never going to forget how we got here, or why we have to help other people who are struggling like we were. Because we're not invisible anymore, Maya said sleepily. No, Sarah said, kissing her forehead. We never were invisible, we were just waiting for someone to really look. On Monday morning, Sarah arrived at the foundation offices to find William waiting with an enormous smile. "I just got off the phone with the National Philanthropic Council," he said. "They want to feature our work in their annual report. They're calling what we're doing the future of community-centered philanthropy." Sarah shook her head in amazement. "6 months ago I was sleeping on the floor of a freezing apartment. Now we're shaping the national conversation about philanthropy." "Not we," William corrected gently. This is your vision, Sarah. I'm just the person with resources who finally had the sense to listen." That afternoon, as Sarah reviewed applications for the summer scholarship program, she came across one that made her pause. The applicant was a 16-year-old girl from Sarah's old neighborhood. Single father, working multiple jobs. The girl had a 3.1 GPA. Not spectacular but solid considering she worked 15 hours a week at a fast food restaurant to help with family expenses. Her essay was raw and honest, talking about the shame of poverty, the exhaustion of never having enough, the dream of building a different future. Sarah saw herself in every word. She approved the application immediately, then added a personal note. "Your struggle has made you strong. Your awareness has made you wise. You're exactly the kind of leader this world needs. Welcome to the program." As the sun set over Atlanta that evening, Sarah stood at her office window, watching the city transform from day to night. Lights flickered on across the skyline. People were heading home to their families, to their lives, to their dreams. Somewhere out there was another mother, another father, another family struggling just like Sarah had struggled. But now there was hope. Now there was a foundation that saw them. Now there was a model for how wealth could be used to lift people up instead of maintaining distance. And it had all started with one act of kindness on a cold Christmas Eve. William appeared beside her at the window. "What are you thinking about?" "About how one moment can change everything," Sarah said. "About how you saw me when I felt invisible. About how that changed not just my life, but all the lives we're touching now." William smiled. "You know what the beautiful thing is? We're just getting started. Imagine what this foundation can accomplish in 5 years, 10 years, a generation. Imagine how many families we can help." Sarah agreed. "How many children we can give opportunities to. How many people we can show that their circumstances don't define their worth." They stood together in silence, two people from completely different worlds who had found common ground in the most unexpected way. A wealthy elderly white man who had spent decades building an empire while losing connection to what mattered most. A black single mother who had spent years surviving on strength and love alone. Together they were building something that would outlast both of them. A legacy of dignity, of seeing people for who they really are, of using resources to create genuine opportunity instead of temporary relief. As Sarah prepared to leave for the evening, heading home to Maya and Zoe, she thought about that Christmas Eve one more time. She remembered the fear, the shame, the desperate hope that somehow everything would be okay. She remembered the moment William had appeared beside her on that frozen street, standing between her children and danger. She remembered his words, spoken through the police car window, "You're not alone tonight," and she realized that was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. Not the money, not the job, not the apartment, the gift of not being alone, because loneliness was the true poverty, the crushing weight of facing impossible odds with no one to help carry the burden. But kindness, real kindness, changed that. It said, "I see you, I'm here, you matter." That was what Sarah and William were building at the Harrison Foundation. Not a charity, but a community. Not handouts, but partnerships. Not pity, but dignity. One family at a time, one person at a time, one act of genuine kindness at a time. The work would continue. The challenges would keep coming, but they would face them together, guided by the simple truth that had started everything. Sometimes one person seeing you, really seeing you, is all it takes to change a lifetime. And sometimes when you've been seen, the greatest gift you can give is to open your eyes and see others. Sarah Mitchell had been invisible for 32 years. William Harrison had been isolated for 15. Together they had found their way home, and they were just beginning to understand how many other people they could help find theirs.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.